This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back to Home Stretch here on Inside the Paint. Please make sure to drop your questions, your comments. Please hit that like button. Does us a huge favor every time you do it. So, Ira, we teased this before the break. Should Tyler Hero replace Duncan Robinson in the starting lineup?
No, no, and no for this reason, and the three no's are there for a reason also. In the starting lineup, you have Jimmy Butler, you have Bam Adebayo, you have Kyle Lowry. You have three players who also need to eat. So if they are being fed, you're not going to get Tyler Hero's 21 points in the second quarter against the Rockets. Tyler Hero's 17 points in the second quarter in last night's victory over the Pistons. The usage, like we mentioned with Victor Oladipo, simply wouldn't be there. He wouldn't have the opportunities. Now, I also think what happens when you do that, Jimmy will defer because Jimmy loves him some Tyler Tuesday. So any playoff game on a Tuesday, the ball goes to Tyler. Kyle, who barely shoots at all these days, loves to defer also. We saw a 2-1-0 fast break last night. Jimmy fed ahead to Kyle. He stopped the drive, fed ahead to Jimmy. He preferred to get the assist and let Jimmy have the basket. And you want to try to get Bam going early because it impacts Bam late in the game also. So when you have those three factors in play, Clay, I just don't think Tyler Hero wouldn't be able to do what he does. Now, the only way I would change that is if Victor Oladipo was so dynamic off the bench that you're getting Tyler 2.0, so it doesn't matter as much. I've seen him mention a bunch of places today on various Twitter accounts. Are they moving toward what you and I mentioned the previous segment when Kendrick Nunn starts the season, they go to their playoff lineup? I don't think so, and I also think it'll almost be like opponents hunting for Duncan Robinson early. We know Duncan Robinson's early foul trouble. Well, that turned into Tyler Hero early foul trouble. Mm-hmm. One thing when Duncan gets too early, whatever. Just bring in a better player. Bring in Caleb Martin, bring in someone else. But if Tyler gets targeted by the star players on the other team who aren't on the bench when Tyler typically is playing now, that becomes really problematic also. Tyler Hero with 2 fouls in the first 4 minutes of the game entirely changes the Tyler Hero equation.
So it would probably make your bench fit better. I mean, you would have Victor Oladipo, Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin. You have Duncan Robinson, who's a shooter, doesn't need to have the ball in his hands. He can come off screens, do things like that. And you have Oladipo being the guy who's ball dominant, Caleb Martin being your tough defender. Maybe that fits better. But when you're doing that at the risk of ruining the fit on the starting lineup, then that becomes a problem. And so I think for everybody asking the question about this, and I know there are a lot of people, the plugging in somebody like Strus would make a little bit more sense. Or if you want to go with the stronger defensive lineup, plug in somebody like Caleb Martin. And then all of a sudden, man, you got a tough starting lineup defensively. They can kind of
but you have the space down. But all of a sudden, are you spacing the floor anymore? No one's respecting Caleb Martin the way they are respecting.
So then we come back to, look, the greatest course of action or the path of least resistance here, the one that makes the most sense, as much as everybody wants to figure out what's wrong and try to make lineup changes and come up with it. The bottom line is that if Duncan Robinson is hitting, if he starts off 3 for 3, then he is a real problem for defensive teams when they're trying to figure out, okay, do we give him even more gravity and then open up the inside for somebody like Lowry, somebody like Butler? When he's on, then he's absolutely worth. But when he's not, that's when you make the adjustment. You don't make the adjustment ahead of time. I think everybody's looking for ways to fix this. But the bottom line is the fix is Duncan makes shots. And if he doesn't, then the fix comes in game. And that's when you start to make that adjustment. People don't want to hear that. People want to make these big moves before the game even starts. But the bottom line is that when somebody is out there and he's proving his worth on the floor, it doesn't make sense to pull him off. But when he's not, then that's when you make the move, and it's got to be a game-by-game thing.
The problem with that is that Duncan Robinson is also the kind of player who could start 0 for 3 on threes and finish 5 of 9. And it's always been from Eric Spoelstra, you keep shooting until you're making. But if you're entering with the pressure that if you take 3 early threes, you darn well better make at least 1 and hopefully 2, or you're not playing, that also could sort of change the approach from Duncan Robinson, where all of a sudden the pressure is there right from the get-go to produce or not play. Luke Babbitt knew the pressure was there from the get-go because he was Luke Babbitt and he wasn't going to play anyway.
It's true.
There were some games he'd open 2 for 2 on threes. It didn't matter. They were going to get to what they wanted to get to. Clay, I think a lot of this will be matchup based. A lot of this will be, can we get the right defenders on the other team's stars so that we can succeed? So with the Nets, it'll be, can we get the right defenders on Kevin Durant, whoever that might be, the right defenders on Kyrie Irving? The feeling might be, we're going to try that PJ Tucker thing again on Durant. And because of that, we still have Jimmy or Kyle who can defend Kyrie. So you go a little bit more in that direction. I think it's going to be more matchup based as well. I know you shouldn't play to your opposition. And as the number 1 seed in the conference, it should be come get us. But this conference has been so close and so equally balanced. And so many players have been in and out that I can't sit here and definitively tell you today, in mid-March, that the Heat are definitively better than the Bucks. They're not. Definitively better than the new look 76ers with James Harden. They're not. Definitively better when the Bulls get Lonzo Ball and now Alex Caruso is already back. They're not. This is very even. It's going to be very tactical on Eric Spoelstra, but it's also going to be, how does he get his best players in the mix? Because he's going to need his best players, because it's not going to be a willy-nilly 9 or 10 deep. You can't afford that. It's not like you make an agreement with the other coach. Eric Spoelstra spoke about this in the bubble when they were all together there in Disney or before preseason games. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do X and Y early and then ABC late, and then you'll do it also. This is trying to pick at the other team's scabs and see what you can do. And the Heat have to minimize those potential inflection points of risk.
Now, here's the good news when it comes to that. Eric Spoelstra and this staff have proven that they're really, really good at that.
Yes.
In the playoffs. And when it becomes tactical, but there is that moment where talent takes over. And I think that's the question that everybody's wondering right now. And it goes back to the beginning of this show, which is, if Jimmy Butler is Jimmy Butler, if he's the Jimmy Butler from the bubble a couple of years ago, I feel really confident about where this team is. If he's the Jimmy Butler that we saw last year against the Bucks, if he's the Jimmy Butler that we've seen many times during the regular season so far this year, then you start to get concerned that when it gets to the point where it's talent versus talent, you don't have the talent to stack up with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. You don't have the talent to stack up with Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton, and Drew Holiday, who I have watched multiple times this year, once against the Heat, saw him do it against Phoenix last week. That big three, they've done it in the playoff. So I need to see that before I'm more confident in this team moving forward as far as being definitively better. But again, the good news is we've seen that this staff can pull out the best in this team when it gets down to it.
So the question becomes this, is how much does coaching make a difference? Does Eric Spoelstra's advantage over Steve Nash negate, let's say, Kevin Durant's advantage over Jimmy Butler, or Kyrie Irving's advantage over Kyle Lowry? That's the thing. Is a lot of people are pointing to, but they have Spoelstra. That's Big O's thing, that they're going to win because of the coaching matchup. It's really going to be matchup based. You mentioned Jimmy Butler. If the Heat play the Milwaukee Bucks, Jimmy Butler will not score because the Bucks have a way of keeping Jimmy from scoring. Right. If the Heat play against the Nets, Jimmy Butler has to score because he has to involve extensively Kevin Durant on the other end, maybe even drawing him into foul trouble to help offset the other end of the court also. Again, all matchup driven.
So if you play Milwaukee, who is it then? Does it have to be Bam and Tyler?
It has to be more Bam. It's interesting now. Brook Lopez is back. Lopez has been out all season with that back injury. The way he played the drop coverage against Bam, the way they dominated inside. We haven't seen that in the season series because of Brook Lopez being out. So I don't know. It has to be him. Maybe it is more Tyler. Maybe in that lineup, you do start Tyler because you need it from the get-go, because they're going to prioritizing as they have shutting it on Jimmy Butler, or maybe they then move one of their prime defenders to Tyler and Jimmy gets a little bit more freedom of movement against that length in the lane again against Milwaukee. So again, Eric Spoelstra, remember people, the Heat's regular season ends on April 10th because they're not in the play-in. They've almost clinched that. They've clinched the play-in berth. They've almost clinched now what the NBA is calling a playoff berth, top 6. You will have off between April 10th and at least April 16th to go ahead and make your plans. The problem is, as a number 1 or 2 seed, you won't know your opponent until possibly that Thursday. But if you wind up knowing your opponent ahead of time and have time to plan, I think there will be distinct Miami Heat approaches against each individual opponent. It won't be, this is our package. This is who we are. Great teams can do that. The Heat's big three could do that. It's come after us. You know, everyone, we take on all comers. This is going to be a very strategic approach to the playoffs where it's almost like in the different rounds of the baseball playoffs. You know how they have certain players who are active and certain players who aren't active in each series, and they change their pitching rotations and their DHs, things like that. I think you'll see that a lot more in this year's playoffs.
Yeah, and so if you look at these matchups, I think it's becoming more and more apparent that the number one seed is vital. And you're right that you won't know who your opponent is. But to me, Ira, I can't see a world where the Brooklyn Nets are in a 7-8 game and they lose that game. I can't see Brooklyn, because Brooklyn's going to want that rest too. I mean, they're going to play that 7-8 game.
Can I give you the scenario there, Clay?
Sure.
I think by the time the playoffs start, Kyrie Irving, because of the cockamamie law and the unreasonableness in New York, will be changed. He'll be playing home games. If the Nets open the playoffs in Toronto, Ontario has shown to be by far of U.S. Sports League the most stringent province, state, and certainly Toronto is a city. Right now, it looks like Toronto is going to finish 7th and Brooklyn's going to finish 8th. If that's the case, the Nets are going into Toronto, into Ontario, without Kyrie Irving. Are you telling me, with Toronto's lineup, with Pascal Siakam playing as well as he is, with Fred VanVleet playing at an all-star level, with Nick Nurse being a great coach, and with the Nets without Kyrie Irving, are you telling me, Clay Ferraro, that you don't think the Raptors can win that 7-8 game?
Against Kevin Durant?
Only Kevin Durant and James Johnson and Goran Dragic and Andre Drummond and Steph Curry.
Well, but I think, I mean, we would assume Ben Simmons would be back by then, right?
Oh, but what has he shown us in Ben? Remember, this is game 7 for Ben Simmons in game 1 because that's a must-win game for Brooklyn when they go up there. Because again, people, this is how the play-in works. Number 7 hosts number 8. The winner of that game gets number 7. In the scenario we just painted, it would be Toronto. If that's the case, the loser of the 7-8 game plays the winner of the 9-10 game. Let's assume in the play-in, number 9 is Atlanta. It looks that way. Number 10 is Charlotte because Washington stinks. Atlanta beats Charlotte in that play-in game at home. I think you'd agree with that, Clay, right? If Atlanta hosts Charlotte in the 9-10 game, Atlanta wins, right?
Yes.
Okay. The Nets have just lost in Toronto, much to the Heat's consternation. Eric Spoelstra's having the watch party on that Thursday night. The Nets are hosting the Hawks. I mean, Trae Young can easily go off for a 50-burger in that game and possibly lift the Hawks. So the Nets, I think, are going to be at risk with 2 must-win games in that scenario. Ben Simmons, nice guy. Nice guy to have on your team when you're up 1-0 in a playoff series. But in game 7, we've seen that guy shrink already in that situation. So what I'm saying is I think there's very much a scenario where the Nets would lose the 7-8 game and the number 2 seed would be, we got us some Toronto, Milwaukee, or Philadelphia. And the Heat are like, oh, man, this is Allen Houston and the Knicks all over again.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, Eric Spoelstra would call Nate McMillan and go, Nate, you've always been my favorite coach. Here's my playbook. Here's what I would do. If you want, I could fly up to Atlanta and even guide your team through practice. Or otherwise, the Nets wind up at number 8. And Clay, keep this in mind also. The Nets right now are the favorite to come out of the Eastern Conference still and win the conference and advance to the finals. So, of course, they would be favored against the Heat in the first round. If you're the conference favorite, you're going to be the favorite. So the Heat can wind up in the situation that the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, 4 out of 7 at home at FTX Arena, and they're the underdog. I'm not trying to be negative here, people. I'm not trying to drive you away. I'm just saying that this season
it's being
has a reality like few other seasons.
Caddyshack, great or good. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate that. Canes, the Heat do not want to play the Raptors or the Nets in the playoffs. The Raptors concern you because of the length, and I get that. And also, man, Fred VanVleet has been hitting the big shots late. You give him credit for that. I wouldn't put them in quite the same category as Milwaukee, as Brooklyn, as Philadelphia, as Boston. Like I put them in that next tier. It's not that you would enjoy playing them, but I think if you're picking between them and any one of those 4 teams,
and Clay, when the Heat play Toronto, the Heat will have the best player on the court in Jimmy Butler. I think they would. We can argue that, but I think they would.
They'd have the second best in Bam.
in those other matchups, they wouldn't have the single best player.
Yeah.
Durant would be the best player. You can make an argument, of course, that Giannis would be, that Joel Embiid would be, that maybe DeMar DeRozan, this season's DeMar DeRozan, might be, that Jason Tatum might be. There's not a lot of matchups where the Heat will have the definitive best player. They would against Toronto. Might not even against the Hawks with Trae Young out there. That's why I think that would be a more favorable matchup. Plus, Nick Nurse has played his guys to death. He has played guys 40 minutes a game, played 6-man rotations. We've seen that. I'm not fearing Precious Achiuwa off the bench in the playoffs. It's just a different look team. It's going to be interesting. I am doing so much scoreboard watching. I am trying to get the Nets to the number 6 spot, so they play number 3, but I'm really having trouble working. They are up 2-1 on Cleveland in the season series. They have 1 game left, so they can win that season series. But you're talking about picking up 4 games in the standings with 12 left. It's not the easiest of math right there, that even if Cleveland goes 6-6, that you're talking like 10-2 by Brooklyn with most of those games without Kyrie.
So Ira's waving his Rangers flag on one side, his Brooklyn Nets flag on the other, really trying to bring those New York teams to the finish line. All right, guys, thanks so much. This hour flew by. We appreciate it. We see you next week right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.